Thanks everyone for being here. This is such a great turnout, and I know we've got many more people watching our live stream and people who will catch this after the fact. But it's great to see so many people here this morning. Obviously, this is the time for this discussion. I was joking. We had a 60-day window to hit, and we hit it. So we were right in it. I'm Ben Max. I'm the program director and executive editor at the Center for New York City and State Law here at New York Law School. Thank you all for being here. And I hope before we get into today's discussion that you'll also mark your calendar for our upcoming events. On December 2nd, we are going to have our 200th City Law Breakfast with Jano Lieber, the chair and CEO of the MTA, joining us to talk about the state of the MTA and a whole bunch of details therein. So please join us December 2nd for that. And then on the morning of December 10th, we're going to have a forum with the candidates for New York City Council Speaker on the morning of December 10th, co-hosted with Citizens Budget Commission, who we've done some work with. So those are two great upcoming events to please join us for. And if you're not on our Center for New York City and State Law mailing list, please go to our website and get on that list to join us and hear about all those events. Okay, today, keys to a successful mayoral transition. We've got an amazing group of experts here who've been so gracious to join us. Thank you, Dean. You didn't really have a choice when I asked, but very appreciative of this great panel who I'll introduce right now. I had to Good to be an editor. You have to edit down these incredible bios from our panelists here. So these are edited. They might point out something now or later that I've cut from their bios that are particularly relevant. But let me introduce our panelists here. Anthony Crowell is Dean and President of New York Law School and Faculty Director of the Center for New York City and State Law. He held several roles in city government, including as an assistant corporation counsel in the law department and rising to become counselor to the mayor under Mayor Bloomberg. He managed a broad portfolio of legal, legislative, operational, and other matters focused on the performance of city government. During his time in city government, Dean Crowell oversaw the vetting and appointment processes of new candidates for top administration positions. Among other notable appointments, the Dean served as executive director, counsel, or commissioner for 6 city charter revision commissions and was a longtime member of the Conflicts of Interest Board. Since coming to New York Law School as Dean and President, he's remained active in civic affairs outside the law school and connecting the school to those civic affairs, including as a commissioner on the City Planning Commission, among other roles. Jennifer Jones Austin is CEO and Executive Director of FPWA, the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, an anti-poverty policy and advocacy organization. As Bill de Blasio prepared to become mayor in late 2013, she was co-chair of that mayoral transition, along with the esteemed civic leader Carl Weisbrod, who may be here. Jennifer Jones Austin has also served as senior vice president of the United Way of New York City, as the City of New York's first family services coordinator, and as deputy commissioner at the New York City Administration for Children's Services. She is on many commissions and boards. Just to name a couple, she's a commissioner on the New York State Community Commission on Reparations Remedies and was the chair of the New York City Racial Justice Commission, which led to city charter amendments to dismantle structural racism and embed racial justice and equity in all government functions. She was at one point chair of the New York City Board of Correction. And again, that's just a sampling. Thank you for being here. Mayor Joshi is the still relatively new president of Greenwood. Congratulations on that. The massive cemetery and National Historic Landmark in Brooklyn. Just prior to taking that role earlier this year, she was deputy mayor of operations under Mayor Eric Adams and a member of the MTA board. Previously, she was President Biden's nominee for administrator of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And then prior, back in city government, previously chair and CEO of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, inspector general for the New York City Department of Correction, and the first deputy executive director of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, among other roles in and adjacent to New York City government. Thank you for being here. And last, but certainly not least, Emma Wolfe is currently Chief of Staff to the President at New York University, NYU. She held that role of Chief of Staff in the New York City Public Advocate's Office under Bill de Blasio and was an integral part of the winning 2013 de Blasio for Mayor campaign and the subsequent mayoral transition. Then a top official in the administration for all 8 years. She started as Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and finished as Chief of Staff to the Mayor and Deputy Mayor for administration, and was a key figure in the transition to the Adams administration. Thank you for being here. All right. What a lineup. Three main themes we're going to discuss today: keys to a successful mayoral transition, organizing and running city government well, and executing on a mayor's top priorities, which of course very often includes, or necessarily includes, working with partners at the city, state, and federal levels. So we will come around many times to our panelists, so no need to get all your expertise into your first answer. And I just want to note, Emma was gracious to move a big NYU meeting for us this morning a little later. Might have to sneak out just a few minutes early. That's part of why we have her on the end there, but thank you for making that happen, Emma. Okay. Big picture. Let's just start with 2, maybe 3 of your biggest keys, guiding principles for a successful mayoral transition. What are your top items? You've got 1 minute to guide the incoming mayor and their transition team. What are a couple of the top values or principles to a successful mayoral transition? Dean Crowell, we're on your home turf here, so please lead us off.
Thank you, Ben. I just want to welcome everyone to New York Law School. We're really happy to have you and to present this program. Thanks to Ben for organizing it and all his wonderful work. There are so many things to say on your question. I'll give 2 things that I think that are important. One is a lesson I always try to impart to my students. It deals with the S word. Who knows what that S word is? It's scale. I think that a transition needs to appreciate the fullness of what municipal government is, its relationship to the state and the federal government, and its place in the world. The scale and enormity at which we operate cannot be forgotten. And the people who are put in place and in trust of carrying that forward really need to appreciate that and understand it. And I think part and parcel with that is my second piece of advice, which is no matter the politics, the philosophy, or the symbolism that you want a transition to represent, they must always be matched by a demonstration of a commitment to the institution that is the city and the people ultimately who need daily service. And so there's a tethering of a lot of different aspects, but at the end of the day, that deference to what the institution is and how it carries forward is critically important. And that's not to say that institutions can't change and adapt, but there needs to be a baseline to start with that gets that deference.
Jennifer?
So on Mayor-Elect Mamdani's election night at his election party, some of you may recall if you listened to his speech, he talked about campaigning in poetry and governing in prose. Let me first just quickly go back up and thank you all for allowing me to come and inviting me to come. I'll just say that you all had many people from whom to choose, right? Last transition, you could have had as many as 10 people to invite, right? I'll just leave it there. But he talked about campaigning in poetry and governing in prose. And what he was really
Not to Mario Cuomo.
Right. Not to Mario Cuomo. That's right. Before he did that other thing, right? Or after he did that other thing. What we need to lean in there is that he was talking about both, like leaning into the promises that he made and driving with them and executing them, but also managing the store, if you will. And so the things that I think about that I think that we're seeing some of this. First, help people appreciate that you're going to keep things moving. You're going to keep the trains moving. Stability is important to New Yorkers. They need to know that on day one, right, the buses, whether they're free or not, the bus is going to show up and pick them up and take them to work. They need to know that that if there's a snowstorm, as Patty Harris told me on day one, that the streets are going to be cleaned up. But then they also need to see that you are beginning to lean into your promises so that you can't achieve them all on day one, but you are going to hit the ground running. So it's the importance of showing that government is stable, that government will function, that Jessica Tisch will remain in place, and that, the cops will be on the street taking care of the business, but also that you're going to live into the promises, but managing the expectations. So I've rambled a little bit. What I'm really centering on is stability is important, and then managing voter expectations. I'll say very quickly on this. Emma will remember that I guess it was the mayor was elected de Blasio was elected on a Tuesday. He announced the transition co-chairs on Wednesday. And Thursday morning, we were up at the North Side Center for Development, rolling out his childcare, universal pre-kindergarten plan. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this is moving really, really fast. And I was anxious because I thought people may think but can you really get it done? You don't have the money. You said you're going to raise taxes. What he was doing was he was kind of throwing the gauntlet down. We're going to get this done, letting the voters know I'm here. I'm going to lean in to the commitment I made to you. But you got to do that while you're managing the expectations because you can't get it done all by yourself.
Meera?
I'd say two things would be team and time. So team, nothing gets done without a good gang of really expert, polished, competent people that adore public service, and not just at the top level, the names that catch headlines, but making sure that there is the second and third and fourth level underneath all the people that do all of that work, because that's essential. So you have to focus on that bi-level staffing just for transition and obviously in governance as well. And then time, everything is against the clock. Since, the minute after winning the election, that clock started. And so balancing urgency with diligence is the art that you hope the leader masters very, very quickly. I think what we've seen on the campaign with Mamdani, the selections that he's made so far, the cadence of rolling them out, the decision to keep Commissioner Tisch, these are all showing us that he's mastered this sort of balance of urgency and diligence. I think there's two other things that are really unique about him coming in at this time. It's been a while since we've had a mayor following another one-term mayor. And so just as important about what you change is what's already working, what can you keep working? And I think, the demonstration we've already seen in keeping Commissioner Tisch is exactly that. It's like wise tolerance. There's a certain amount of friction that you need to get the best result for New Yorkers. And that means you're humble enough to say, the choices that my predecessor made are good and I'm keeping them. Not all of them, but some of them. And so I think that's really important. The other factor that I think is very important in this transition is like the fear about is government going to continue to stably function, we have a new fear about what is the reaction from DC because of Mamdani. And there's only so much the mayor can do to control that. But what he always has, and someday she will have, is the platform to tell New Yorkers what's happening in a way that they can relate to, in a way that makes them feel safe or at least informed. And so as we start that dance with the federal government, which will, not be a ballet, him making sure, the mayor, Mamdani, making sure that the citizens know what is happening and they're hearing it from him, I think is going to be really important in transition and obviously when he begins on January 1st.
We'll certainly come back to the federal government in a moment. Just on that point, if anybody understands that lesson, you would hope it is Mayor-Elect Mamdani, who so masterfully used communication in his campaign. Emma, zooming back out for a moment, big keys for a mayoral transition?
Yeah, I mean, I like going last, but it's a little bit like Boggle, where you're just left with the really hard stuff at the end. So I don't have a ton of unique things to add. I guess the one thing I would add is the extraordinary amount of discipline that the leadership team for a transition has to have during what can feel like both an eternity and a sprint, and in an intense media market. And so there's going to be good hours and good days and bad days, but having the discipline and the adherence to your core purpose and your core values and your core intentions around your transition becomes incredibly important when you start getting the regular slings and arrows that would come with any transition at any time in a place like New York City.
All right, you get to go first on this.
Yeah.
What's one big thing for a mayoral transition to avoid? What is a huge thing that could trip up a transition process or throw gum in the works? What's something that you really need to make sure not to do in this tiny window of transition period? And obviously that extends into the beginning of governing, but what's something to avoid?
I think it is an extension of the last point I made. If one doesn't have the discipline to block out the noise occasionally, but I mean, it's just a tightrope, right? If a bunch of folks who you trust and respect are saying, I think you might be getting this wrong, here's my perspective, I don't think you have a diversity of perspectives inside your inner circle, blah, blah, blah. You have to be able to listen and take that in and be deft and change your plan, at the same time, I think what can be a real challenge and can become a problem for transitions, what I think would be a real error would be to lose a sense of what your core mission is and to start over listening and overly course correcting to the day's critics. Because you can very quickly find yourself drifting off course from your mission.
Jennifer, what would you add on something to avoid in a mayoral transition?
That the principal, the mayor, making sure that the mayor, not ensuring that the mayor is clear about his role in this moment, whether he is leader or manager. I think we've seen too many times people who are elected and they are running a municipal government and they think that they can do it all. And they're not hiring the best managers, or there are too many cooks in the pot, if you will. Everybody wants to lead. You need people who embrace your vision and have the ability to execute on. Yes, they too can be leaders, but they have to understand their role. And the mayor himself, this moment, has to understand that they really are the voice and the vision, and they're putting people in position to actually execute.
Meera?
I've made this analogy before, and I think it's along the same lines of discipline and hiring the right talent. Is like thinking of this as a corporation. New York City is an extremely complex beast, and so ensuring that you are as focused and sharp about all of those decisions and the cadence of them as you would be in the mindset of leading a corporation. And what that means to me in practice, because like being a mayor is not exactly being a CEO, is ensuring that you're bringing people in that have all of the core competencies and also don't have outsized egos. And I would say this because in so many emergency situations, agencies need to work together. And the best way to sabotage that moment is to have infighting within agencies. And so, yes, they should have an ego because they wouldn't want to be commissioner if they didn't have one, but also a deep understanding that unless you work together in city government, you're not working at all. And I think in making sure that the team knows that and that message comes from the mayor is really important.
Again, the current transition to that point, that's how you get a first deputy mayor, Dean Foulahan, to come in and not bring in a big ego there. Anthony, something to avoid in a transition, but also if you could build on that, what does the outgoing administration need to do in particular? What are the norms around this? If you could take us
Sure.
there.
So I just want to echo everything my colleagues here have said. I agree. I will say that one thing I would advise is to not act impulsively or rush to a conclusion on any one candidate or any one structure. Take a measured approach. I fully understand that there are some time limits and things that should happen or optimally would happen by a certain time, but I would avoid rushing to hire people who may feel like a trophy pick or that they're the shiny coin. A transition is a moment to understand what the existing ecosystem is of the so-called permanent government, but also understanding more broadly that you're creating an administration that is an ecosystem, and that while there will be tensions, and those tensions can be good, it has to ultimately work. And having the right team members in place across the government is critical. And I can't emphasize enough that you have to take a more measured approach than sometimes what I've seen.
What does a trophy pick mean? It means exciting name
As
that's out.
somebody who has some very unique experience, they get a lot of they have notoriety. There's somebody who's well known, somebody who could even be a celebrity out of government or politics. But those aren't necessarily the people who can make the trains run on time. Those aren't the people who are always the ones who know how to get along or understand the big, broad picture, the scale, the institution. I've seen it go badly.
What are the norms around what the outgoing administration needs to do? We've heard Mayor Adams in recent days and weeks talk about we're putting together a great document for the next administration.
Sure. So, there's no set playbook on how a transition goes, but there are norms and customs that are followed. The agencies are all asked to prepare a transition document that will outline their functions, key goals that are being pursued, projects, ongoing litigation, contracts, transactions, things like that. And so that's supposed to be compiled in a way that gives the transition and the mayor's core team an ability to navigate what the big issues are at any given agency, but also what critical needs in terms of new leadership might form those considerations. So the law department certainly plays a significant role in looking at all that, ensuring that how governance issues at these agencies are presented is accurate. But each one of these agencies is its own mini corporation within the larger municipal corporation. And so it has powers, duties, and functions. There are lines of authority that need to be transferred if there are resignations, if there are changes. So all of that needs to be considered. There's vetting that needs to go on for new candidates. The vetting is critically important. Candidates are vetted oftentimes before they are presented as a slate for people to start working through. Ultimately, the finalists for any one position, whether it be a position within City Hall or at an agency, are all going to need, particularly those who are high-level announcements, are going to need, in an optimal scenario, review by the Department of Investigation. Typically, lawyers for the transition and lawyers at the law department look at candidates. They make sure that the statutory qualifications for positions are adhered to. And then, of course, there's any number of integrity checks that you want to make sure the candidate is able to satisfy, both in terms of their overall trustworthiness and competence, but also understand if there's any conflicts of interest that they might have as a result of their personal assets, as a result of organizations they belong to, things like that.
Let me just quickly add, it isn't talked about often enough that there are people who stay in place. Like December 31st, the lights don't go out, and now the city is black. And on January 1,
That's right.
Nobody's there. Or on January 2nd, a commissioner's walking in the door, or deputy mayor's walking in the door, and there's nobody there. That's not how it works. Very often, you will have commissioners who will stay, in their post, and that maybe they are asked to continue, or there will be a time certain when they are leaving. Deputy commissioners, assistant commissioners, general counsels within agencies will be in place if they have not decided to leave. And so the transition occurs not just with the outgoing transition documents, but the transition occurs over the first 2 to 3 months where incoming deputy mayors, incoming commissioners will sit with the leadership that is already in place and talk about what are the issues, what are the initiatives that you've been working on, what are the challenges that we are facing in this moment. So there is the transition. We are seeing the transition in terms of who gets appointed to this position or that position, but the transition is actually on.
Emma, you were transition day one and then final day handing off the transition. Say a little bit about the experience on the incoming end of the transition coming into 2013 into 2014, and then how you tried to do it handing off on the other end. Any key things that you learned from the Bloomberg administration outgoing, things you tried to do outgoing in the Blasio administration?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from the Bloomberg administration, and couldn't agree more with what Dean Crowell and John were just speaking of in terms of the focus of the outgoing administration and how critical it is. One thing and I totally agree. I mean, there is continuity of operations, and it is also critically important that the sort of second tier of leadership inside agencies across government, certainly in the frontline agencies that may be dealing with a snowstorm on day 2 or what have you, that you understand the second level of leadership. Those folks might become commissioners of agencies, but often whether or not they become the sort of figurehead for or the commissioner for an agency, they're critical in keeping the trains running on time. That second set of folks, that second level of people, middle management doesn't do them justice in terms of their importance to the running of things. And so ensuring that there's continuity with those folks and ensuring that there's you're getting as much information as possible from the outgoing administration to the incoming administration is really, really important, because it could be, and it was for us, a snowstorm right away. The thing that I think I learned pretty quickly, and I kept learning this lesson over and over again for 8 years, is your listening posts. You can't take for granted your listening posts. You think you live in New York City, you work in New York City, you've been around the block. Of course, you know what to do in a snowstorm. I mean, the sanitation department, you've got all these, sure, yes. But there is also this element of having your ear to the ground and understanding when things aren't going exactly as planned, and being really open to the feedback from a local business owner or a local council member, a local assembly member who you may not have had a pre-existing relationship with. And if they're saying, hey, these blocks aren't clear, you really have to listen to it. That takes a minute. And it takes a minute for the incoming administration, it did in our case, to understand the enormous scope and the need for those listening posts on the ground in a really active way. So that is one sort of key ingredient. On the outgoing, the thing that I agree in terms of the competence, needing a profile for all the sort of, risk areas and opportunity areas, agency by agency and area by area, is incredibly important. I also think there's, all of that aside, a human element to transitions. And I say this not just for government. Very oddly, I've been in higher ed, and I've been a part of a couple presidential transitions too. And it holds true sector to sector, which is transitions make people crazy. It can be a really scary thing. Yeah. Everybody knows change is scary. And remembering that these are folks who commit, and renew their commitment every day to New York City, and they've given their livelihoods to these jobs, whether it's a year or 20 years. And remembering the disruptive quality around transitions and change and how that can impact people in the workplace, that's not something to undercount. I did at first. I was like, geez, what is going on? But you start to sort of actually get a sense, oh, wow, there's a minute where you have to give people space and grace to deal with the change that's happening.
Yeah. Can I spill a little tea? I remember the calls that I was fielding because Eric Adams had won the primary, and it happened in June, and it was all but certain that he would become mayor. I was getting the calls, people saying to me, I'm in my position as commissioner, or I'm in my position as head of this, and I've got somebody telling me, like in July, they're going to be appointed, and we need to get ready because they're not in favor of this or they're not in favor of that, or I'm going to be head of this and maybe you can be my deputy. And so the people on the inside at the time they were feeling disrespected and devalued. And it wasn't necessarily intentional, but the team that was coming in was trying to get ready. That's not the way.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce both of your comments were phenomenal. It's a real issue. The problems that occur when there is a transition, and certainly a commissioner might not be present anymore, and there might be a first deputy or another deputy who's in charge. It breeds on everyone's vulnerability. I remember when I went into the Bloomberg administration, I had done vetting as part of the transition, but I was from the law department. So I knew a lot of the senior leadership and the ranks and sort of that senior level of the agencies. The number of calls about what's happening, is it, who's coming in? I'm worried I'm going to lose my job. And there's nothing that you can truly say to guarantee someone that there won't be some change, but setting a tone at the beginning that there's a respect and an understanding that the work must go on and that communication will be there is really important. I mean, it's
pile on, because this is I think a subject I think many of us feel strongly about. People that my experience, people in public service with these ruling jobs that have held them for decades have such a deep commitment to the city. It's unbreakable. And so honoring that during the transition is really essential to good government. And there are lots of people, there's 50,000 people who, have come into the portal, but balancing that and making sure that everybody knows that these will be real decisions based on qualifications and need, I think is really important, because you can't overnight develop the kinds of muscle memory some public servants have on what to do in an emergency. It's just unfathomable.
We should also mention it's the depth of expertise that you're getting at, but also, particularly at this moment, there's been a lot of transition post-pandemic, been a lot of departures, a lot of retirements. That all needs to be calculated as to your point about a one-term mayor. There's been a lot of things that have been rebuilt, and a lot of that memory is now starting to grow. But that needs to be assessed and understand in fullness where the institutional strength lies.
And if we take 1 minute, what does a transition co-chair actually do?
Well, the transition coach, let me back up and say.
I know it can vary depending on who right. Yes.
Because there's things that I see happening right now that I surmise are different than what I experienced. Right. So the transition co-chair's responsibility is to help stand up the new government, the new administration. That can look like sitting down with the mayor-elect, even before the mayor-elect is the mayor-elect, to first and foremost develop the transition game plan, but lean in and look at what the organizational structure will be. How many deputy mayors, what their portfolios will be, looking at key senior leadership positions such as the chancellor, the fire commissioner, the police commissioner, the sanitation commissioner, and working with the mayor-elect to make those decisions sooner rather than later. I would, and I could be wrong about this, when I look at what has happened with this transition, I believe that a lot of that decision making was actually happening, or considerations, well before the transition co-chairs were brought to the table. That there was an understanding of what the structure would look like. When you announce your first deputy mayor within less than the first week, the first deputy mayor is leaning in and saying, this is what the structure should look like. And especially somebody like Dean Fullahan, who's been in the position. So I believe the structure was already in place, thinking about who would be the right senior commissioners. A lot of that thinking had already gone on. So I believe the role right now is probably to help stand up the government. The structure is already put in place. Now let's look at these other key leadership positions and do the vetting and the sourcing.
For anybody who wants to jump in here, there is a tension in these top appointments, whether it's deputy mayor, top commissioners, schools chancellor, et cetera, around continuity, around bringing in your own people who you trust, around ideological alignment, around policy expertise, and around management. And I think everyone knows, right? You can be the policy expert on housing, but maybe that doesn't make you the deputy mayor for housing, because that's both a leadership and a management job. Say a little bit about balancing search for talent, questions about continuity. Obviously, keep on the police commissioner. That's a big one, but we don't need to go into discussion on that. But search for talent, continuity, policy expertise, ideological alignment, management capabilities. How do you balance all that and put a team together? What are some of the guideposts? What are some of the key principles there?
We're in a law school, so I'll throw out something. At the core, all of these, whether it's the subject matter, a management, political, it's all about problem solving. And so I think some traditional, rules about how to make a selection for position are really useful. And giving people hypotheticals, seeing how they respond in those situations is a really good window to what you can expect in real life, which is going to be cabinet meetings where you're making these kinds of decisions. And asking them to talk about areas where they've solved problems in the past. I have found that gives you the best glimpse of the person in action. And to Anthony's point, like, you can go on the resume or the glitter, but in that moment, how that person thinks and the judgment they use and the kinds of measured approach they take is going to be really on display when you give them a few hard hypotheticals, which I'm sure all the law students here appreciate me saying.
I'll just quickly add that one of the things, again, I look at this through a certain lens, having been in the role before. With Mayor-Elect Mamdani, he's got to make sure that he is standing up a team that is both, that has the capacity to be transformative and transactional. And the co-chairs that he's appointed, or at least 3 of them have been in New York City government. And they have done the work of managing complex problems, situations. They've advanced key initiatives. A lot of their work has been transactional. He's talking about transforming city government. So he's got to have the right balance of leaders who know how to embrace the vision and see beyond the walls and the borders that are already stood up, to kind of break through them while keeping the trains running. That is going to be critical. If he does not have transformative leadership in place, nothing is getting done. Now, Dean Fullahan, I'll quickly say, is one who knows how to embrace vision and then figure out how to make a way out of no way, but they're going to need many more soldiers like him.
Yeah, I think one of the keys is to get the subject matter expertise and the ability to manage at scale and understand how to transform, and also be highly aspirational, both to the cause, meaning the mission of your agency and the overall administration's goals, but also to inspire staff to be a better version of themselves and to make the unit that's being managed a better version of itself. And that's a lot, but it's doable. It also requires a really delicate set of balances between deputy mayors and the mayor, and allowing commissioners to do their job and allowing deputy mayors to shape the teams under them as well. One of the things I think that's important is, hopefully, before too many commissioners are appointed, that the deputy mayors will be in place and will have a role in helping to at least pick that baseline team. I think that's important as well to getting it right.
Oh, this is a game of boggle. I'm
Well, but is when you're thinking about deputy mayors and commissioners, how important is management versus leadership expertise? I mean, ideally you have it all, but
right. No, ideally you have it all. I mean, ideally you have it all, and I do think I agree with. I agree with what everyone said in terms of the balance. As you all were talking, I was going back in my head of like, when I saw the best in public servants around City Hall and commissioners in the hardest of times. And I think that the thing that sort of sets folks apart is when they relish the difficult problems and the thorniest of problems, and problems that honestly don't sound that exciting to that many people. But they've got a real passion for the nuts and bolts, and for making something work that folks don't think can work, and for having both and this will sound funny, a respect for the bureaucracy and a disdain for the bureaucracy at the same time. So I think having that sort of passion and approach can be the difference maker in terms of sort of leadership qualities.
as we talk about appointments, we obviously just have a few initial ones from the mayor-elect, more to come. The most recent example of a mayoral transition, we had this bifurcated situation where Mayor Adams was coming in, and including Mayor Joshi, made a bunch of appointments that people thought were fantastic and highly reputable, and then brought in a bunch of people who people had major question marks about, who had lots of baggage, who seemed to just be sort of bringing in friends and so forth. With some relevant resume items, of course, but lots of question marks. And then also, though, part of that was question marks about chain of command. Mm-hmm. A deputy mayor for public safety who was sort of overseeing the police commissioner, but not technically. And then lots of things got gummed up in the works. So if anybody wants to say anything about two parts to this, one, how do you manage that process to not have a new mayor bringing in people who should not be coming in at high levels of government? Is there anything that can be done around that when you have a principal who is, of course, in charge? And two, how do you set up some of those structures, that chain of command, to make sure that the government is just going to run as smoothly as possible? Wants to jump in on this one first?
I mean, I'll answer the first part of your question, which is, look, it's their name on the door. They got elected. And I would question folks who believe in the mission and who are on the team, I guess I would question a lot about a dynamic in which they're sort of figuring out how to work around their principal or tell their principal that they're wrong, he or she is wrong. I think probably there's something amiss there to begin with. So I think it's an impossible situation. I don't think there's an easy answer, nor should there be, for the first part of your question. I'll let colleagues.
They made something Emma said earlier, discipline, right? So discipline, if you're speaking from the principal's perspective, and I think the Mamdani campaign has shown us incredible discipline to cadence things and get results, but discipline in how you are allocating your time so that no one thing sucks up an oversized amount of it. The amount of reactive time that a city hall can get sucked into is like a sponge, but there's only so much you can do about a bad press story. It shouldn't paralyze the entire building. Mm-hmm. So I often think of this as really knowing there are buckets. There's the stuff that you came in and you said you were going to get done, and that always has to be a dedicated percentage of every day, and owners of that campaign that are working on it diligently. There is the reactive stuff. But don't let it own you. It is what it is. You do the best you can. You're not going to anticipate everything, but you can't labor in the horror of it, because that's what it feels. I mean, I guess some of us are battled here. That's what it feels like at times, the horror of it. And then there is the regular maintenance, which at scale is no small feat. So making sure your deputy mayors are alerting you to fundamental things like the fleet is really, really aged and we better buy, new backhoes soon. Not that shouldn't be coming to the mayor, but these kinds of just regular maintenance things that your deputy mayors need to be taking care of, and ensuring that they're happening between OMB and the agencies, so that they hopefully don't come up to you, but when they do, you have the time and discipline to focus on them.
If I can just quickly add, because I feel like I'm going to burst, but I'm going to try to do this without getting myself in trouble.
I'm going to move away.
Okay. So a mayor does not develop discipline. You either have it or you don't. And a lot of this has to do with character. I once had a conversation with the former mayor of Philadelphia about governance and leadership in the municipality. And he said to me that when he was running for mayor, he reached out to a very good friend and he said, I want you to help. And the mayor said to him, the friend said to him, I have one question for you. And that's going to determine whether I'm going to help you or not. You say you want to, head up Philadelphia. No, I just told who the mayor was. Mayor Nutter, Michael Nutter. And he said that his friend said to him, one question, do you want to be mayor or do you want to be the mayor? How you answer that question will determine whether I'm going to. Michael Nutter said he thought about it for a few seconds. Then he said, I want to be mayor. I want to do the job. He said, I'll help you. If someone is running to be mayor, to run the city of New York, you don't have to worry about discipline as much. You don't have to worry about the integrity and decision making about who that person is going to appoint. It's not going to be gimmicky, right? So I think it begins with, do we have a mayor in Mayor Mamdani who wants to be mayor or wants to be the mayor? And you're going to see how that plays out. I think his decision to appoint First Deputy Mayor Dean Fullhan gives you a strong indication that he really wants to run the city.
One of the things we're getting at a little bit is the question of the mayor's inner circle. So when you're in a transition period and then into office, you're surrounding yourself with top appointees at the deputy mayor level, but also chief of staff, counsel to the mayor. The list goes on. Budget director, huge role, right? Some of these things are not always easily captured in deputy mayors and commissioners. To the point, though, about you have discipline or you don't, mayors do learn on the job. You have to be able to learn and adapt and be flexible. Bill de Blasio has been very open about some of the changes he needed to make, and we all saw it, right? Getting to things on time and so forth, and talked about that. How does that happen? How on the inside does a mayor have an inner circle that either is helpful, hurtful, can have someone, people around them that can tell them no, can tell them they're doing something wrong? Is that just, again, about the character of the person and being willing to surround themselves with people who will say those things? Anthony, you were up front.
Yeah, so, we had the benefit of the Bloomberg bullpen, which was an immersive environment. I'll say it was an immersive political environment, but an immersive learning environment in terms of understanding what was going on at any given point. Mayor sitting in the center, senior staff sitting around him. So there was a high degree of accessibility, which meant a high degree of conversation and a significant degree of familiarity with what all of us were doing and how things were going. So I think that benefited Mike handily in his learning process. I also think he came to the job to be mayor, and he came to the job with a set of principles and values that guided both the learning and the doing. And so that was really helpful. Other mayors may have similar processes, but it's also about how the gatekeeping operation might work that controls information flow. When you're in an open environment like a bullpen, it's a little different. And so that can really influence that. It also depends on whether the balance between being an inside mayor and an outside mayor, how much direct interaction are you having with those who are doing the everyday senior management functions versus being really externally focused and only getting a glimpse at it at certain points during a week or a month. So that just frames some of it.
All right, let me move on because we want to cover a few other things and then open up to a couple audience questions. This question comes up all the time. How many deputy mayors? What deputy mayors? And sometimes it feels a little bit silly because if there's clear guidance, leadership, vision, management, it doesn't really matter. But I want your perspectives on that. What is the right number, just in your view? Again, there's no secret formula here. Is there a right number of deputy mayors? Which are the most important to have? Bill de Blasio didn't have a deputy mayor for operations at first. Mm-hmm. You were recently deputy mayor for operations. Maybe you have a view on how essential that role is. You guys decided to create that. Mm-hmm. The position you had at the end, deputy mayor for administration, was a newly created deputy mayor slot when you took it. Do you want to start us off in that, Emma?
Yeah, sure. And if I have to do my Irish exit, I apologize to everyone. And I just want to, it hasn't taken enough credit. I just want to touch on the previous line of questions in terms of being able to talk to the mayor or anyone about how they need to sort of course correct. It's not just about the inner circle on the inside. It's also about the folks on the outside that you can trust. Jen was one of them for many of us. And there were a handful of people who would tell you like it is, but also had been in your position. And so they sort of understood what was going to work if things were going wrong. And she delivered things very kindly most of the time.
Calling her all the time.
But I do think that, but in all seriousness, I think that's incredibly important when you have to adjust. In terms of deputy mayors, I think, I do agree with the sort of less is more, especially initially strategy. And I think the deputy mayor for operations is critical. But if you're sort of just talking about sheer number, fewer the better to start.
I would say there's no magic number. It's the function. And I think the grouping, so agencies that intertwine on a daily basis, it's, think of that as one group, and that's a natural place to have deputy mayor leadership. But I would take it away from, the people, the personalities, or a particular number, and stick to what is the goal? What do I want to get out of this in terms of function? And, as the principal, you want one person to tell you how infrastructure is moving and transportation's moving, then that's where your deputy mayor of operations comes in. And the same with the other buckets of subjects.
Quickly add, I believe that less is more. And that so often what happens is you start seeing more and more deputy mayor posts pop up in many instances out of accommodation.
That's right.
Somebody you want somebody to come in. Oh, but I need the deputy mayor title. Want somebody to stay. Oh, but I need the deputy mayor title.
These aren't promotional opportunities. I can grow into being a deputy mayor.
Yeah.
So I agree. I think less is more. Look, this deputy mayors represent a framework. They are established by executive order, and they should fill out that framework for a neat and orderly governing operation that has rational relationships. The agencies within each portfolio have a rational relationship to one another with a leader who ideally has helped pick them, but that's important. I would also say that I want to just acknowledge what Jen said. I think that having too many starts to blur lines, and it also it would tend. There's a tendency, at least I've noticed, not so much in the Bloomberg administration, but in more recently, we'll say that there's a lot of titles that might not actually have the functions they would suggest. And so that's not good for internal management.
Yeah.
It's not good for external relations and external interaction. It's certainly not good to getting the job done, because you're going to have a lot of infighting about whose turf is whose, rather than what are we doing for the people.
Right.
Before we take a couple audience questions, and maybe if a few people want to line up, we'll start there in a moment. But one of the big keys to a transition, if you could each share a pearl of wisdom on this, is obviously hitting the ground running to accomplish your biggest campaign promises. We won't get Emma's perspective on UPK. That's okay. There's been a lot of discussion about that out there, but especially, and this seems to continue to be the case because of how much power Albany does have and state government does have over the city. But we see mayors regularly come in with top priorities that need particularly approval or help from the state government. So that's one piece of this. But what are a couple of keys to accomplishing your top campaign priorities? Hit the ground running on that. Meera, do you want to start us?
I'd say, especially for Mayor Mamdani, it's going to be Albany. So having a big tent behind his campaign promises, which he already has. He was elected mayor, so clearly that's established. Making sure that himself and his top advisors are having those regular relationships with Albany. Don't be shy about going to Albany. Don't think that you're the mayor and you don't need to go to Albany. You do need to go to Albany. And making sure you have an excellent and growing team of surrogates that can can tell that story, but not from government's perspective. And here, I think it's really important to individualize it. Like some of the most powerful changes come because we can talk about the effect that it has on an individual person. So what does free buses look like for an individual today? And, you know, what is their bus trip today? And what is it tomorrow? What does that mean at the end of the month in terms of the money that they have at the end of the year? How does that help their kids? Make this thing relatable, because you're talking to hundreds of people with tiny little auctioneer blocks of like speaking and making your point. And you've got to find the thing that's going to ring and stay with them.
Thoughts?
I think that clearly articulated goals are important. So we know what the mayor-elect's campaign promises were, but in the Bloomberg administration, we had a campaign promise tracker. There was a delegation of who was responsible for pursuing each of the goals that were being tracked. And so there was some ownership of that. There was also status checks on where things stood. And so there was, I would say,
Might be you.
I would say there. So I think that's a valuable thing. But the other thing is to make sure that so much as you've delegated the responsibility, that you're truly the right people with the right agencies under them, and that they have the resources to actually get the job done.
Can I jump in real quickly, because this is a very important issue. What Mamdani is going to have to manage throughout his tenure, but especially in these first several months, is not a matter of policy, it's a matter of politics. He is coming in and he will begin governing in the year that Kathy Hochul is running for re-election, and she's very vulnerable. He's coming in and he will begin governing in a year when Congress is trying to, the Democrats are trying to reclaim the majority. And so his agenda, that has been described as a socialist by the man he's going to see tomorrow as a communist agenda, he's going to face a governor who's got to figure out how she holds on to the state and balancing all of those political concerns and the Republicans versus the Democrats. She's got to make sure that she keeps the New York City voters, the 1 million plus, in her camp. But she's got to do that while balancing the upstate people who aren't down with Mamdani's vision and his agenda. Then he's got to figure out how he's going to work with Hakeem Jeffries and with Schumer, who are trying to regain control of Congress. And they're concerned about how his agenda flies, for the rest of the country. So it's not simply, who you send in to talk about your policies. They've got to figure out what their shared game plan is and what their timeline is on day one, because he's got to look like he's delivering for the people of the city of New York, while she's got to look like she's trying to hold the line, while Jeffrey's got to look like he's trying to hold the line, while also trying to bring the people that he brought into the camp along with him. So it's politics and policy.
Very, very well outlined. In case people haven't been following, the mayor-elect is meeting with the president tomorrow in Washington. Let's take some audience questions. Please try to not make it a speech. Let's just
Michael.
throw your questions at the panel here so we can get answers.
I'm Michael Myers, president of the New York Civil Rights Coalition. My question is related to not just policy, but law. I remember when new mayors came in, including Mayor Bloomberg, and their constituency wanted to change the law. They wanted to change the law, including public schools for Harvey Milk School for gays, the single-sex public schools for women, single-sex public schools for men or boys. And that was against the law. It was against Title IX. But Mayor Bloomberg and others, despite the law, insisted that they would have public schools for Black boys, public schools for girls, and did not enforce the law. So how does this administration change public policy without ignoring the law, like previous mayors did, including Bloomberg? He ignored the law. and created schools that were illegal. And later on changed the federal policy and changed the law. They're going to Congress.
So I don't necessarily have the answer to your question, but I will say that sometimes laws have to be changed. Some laws shouldn't remain intact and sometimes they have to change. And so sometimes the way that you push the change that is necessary is by taking action to challenge it. Right now, we're seeing that a lot at the federal level, but I'm just saying sometimes that's the way it has to be done. That push the envelope.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you so much for having this policy briefing. It's very helpful. So we always hear that small businesses are the backbones of the neighborhoods and the lifeblood of New York's economy, but we know that poetic political platitudes don't actually create policy. So as a small business owner here in Tribeca and a member of the Tribeca Alliance, I'd like to ask, what concrete mechanism would you recommend to ensure that small businesses are not just spoken about, but actually listened to and included in a meaningful decision-making way during the transition?
I'll briefly start by saying we're about to see any day the full transition committee, which will include subcommittees that will deal probably with things like economic development and, small business and things like that. So that might be one of those steps that they start to, have those fuller subcommittees of the transition and then start to bring stakeholders in to talk about that. But other thoughts?
I'll just quickly add that the New York City Independent Budget Office has been doing some work, taking a look at small businesses in New York City and how much they add to the revenue, the economy of New York City, and the challenges that we're seeing over the course of the last several years, since COVID, with more and more online shopping. And so one of the ways to engage is to amplify the work of the Independent Budget Office to bring your case forward.
I would also add that it's critically important that everyone acknowledge the scale and magnitude of the impact that small businesses bring to the city, not only in terms of the employee base, but what they provide in terms of goods and services to communities. They're accessible. And so I think it's an acknowledgement of that. And I would imagine that given Mayor-Elect's priorities, that small businesses will play heavily in that. The very people who helped elect him are the ones who are most likely to work at and own small businesses. And so I think there'll be a great deal of respect and deference to that. And so their voices will be heard, but the voices of small businesses are not just heard in everyday conversation on the street. I mean, small businesses have such influence in faith communities. They have influence in how community boards make decisions. They have influence with council members by creating bids that help empower communities holistically. So I think in some ways we might underestimate how much small business can achieve. I think we have to activate those ways and let people realize where those voices are being heard.
Thank you very much.
Actually, let me just also quickly add, I know you want to get at this on the front end, but this is actually one area where if you look at the Mayor-Elect's policy platform, he's actually laid out a pretty detailed set of promises on small businesses. You may have already reviewed that, which creates a accountability mechanism on the other end, right?
Exactly.
And so when there's areas of policy where a mayor-elect has laid out more promises, you do have that built in to try to hold them accountable for following through on.
I'm just saying, if you look at the IBO, I don't know if the report is out yet, I have to look at that, but it demonstrates the loss of revenue that the city is experiencing with small businesses not being supported. And so that's one of your big talking points. We need revenue right now.
Yeah, the independent budget, New York City IBO. Just to that question of have we seen that play out? Yes and no. I mean, I think the press particularly is very sympathetic to people coming. Again, this is on the back end. You don't necessarily want to have to do this. Is very sympathetic to people coming and saying, the mayor promised these things, he's not delivering on them. I mean, you don't want to get, that's that's the root of a lot of this conversation. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. My name is Elvis Machuca. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, traumatic brain injury survivor with recurrent migraines. I'm a patient at the JNJP in the Bronx. I'm asking the mayoral team to strengthen funding for partnerships that connect New York City with the VA, so veterans have real access to housing, mental health, meaningful work. When you invest in veterans' health and futures, you strengthen the entire city. And I see that as a backbone of the economy. Small business owners try to correlate their policies. I learned that we go to lobby. My question is, how is our Mayor Mamdani going to help veterans in the future?
Since no one here is directly involved with the Mamdani campaign or transition, I don't know that we'll be able to have a great answer for you, but certainly the issues are well taken.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much. Mamdani is coming in, or will be coming in, with tens of thousands of extremely energized, activated supporters and various groups. Various of his allies are trying to organize them to go in buses to Albany. New York City DSA is planning, I think, half a dozen or more state legislative primaries. It seems like this is an opportunity for Mamdani to exert pressure for his agenda, and also a challenge in how are you going to make those alliances when your allies are primarying the people that you're trying to ally with. Could you talk about, from the perspective of previous mayoral transitions and the first 100 days, how they manage the sort of inside-outside strategy?
So I feel like I'm going to spill the tea again.
We encourage that.
So Mayor de Blasio ran on a campaign, a full-day universal pre-K for all New York 4-year-old children in New York City. As I said, on the second day following his election, he announced that that he was going full throttle and he was going to get the millionaires tax. I think he was going to tax like people earning more than $500,000 to pay for it. And there was a conversation had with Governor Cuomo at the time, who said, I got the money for you, but I cannot raise taxes in my reelection year. And Mayor de Blasio was like, I need the millionaires tax. And Governor Cuomo was like, I got the money for you. He's like, I need the millionaires tax. I don't need to tell you the rest of the story, right? We got full day UPK, but we also got a whole lot of other headaches and challenges. And so the game that has to be played in these very first days is how does everybody win? So how does Mamdani get to move his vision forward without creating challenges for our current governor and for the Congress?
There's one, I think, good litmus test is you're moving it forward to an extent that it's irreversible. It might not be everything you want, but now you've normalized something and New Yorkers expect it. So now we expect that we'll get 4-year-old pre-K. We're not going to go backwards. Did it come out, as gracefully rolled out as Mayor de Blasio wanted? No, but the long-term effect is there's a seismic change in what we can provide 4-year-olds today.
To your point, I had a conversation with Mayor-Elect Mamdani, and he said, the game plan is we got to focus on achieving the vision. Now we got to think about how we get there. And it may not be easy, but and it may not be exactly how I envision it or somebody else, but the end game is what we're going for.
I think it's best described as the art of incrementalism. There's a real art to it.
I would say, as we wrap up, and I just want one final thought from each of our panelists that I'll ask you in a second, but part of the theme here today, obviously, and you have this every time there's a new mayor, is you have to learn from the experiences before you. And so we've already seen with Mayor-Elect Mamdani, he had this tax increase proposal as part of his agenda, but he's already saying in the campaign, very different to the illustration that Jennifer just gave. He said, well, if the money to fund this program is findable in different ways, the key is the outcome in the programs. Now, Mayor de Blasio had the tax increases as a core part, not just of the mechanism to pay for pre-K, but as a philosophical belief that there was an inappropriately not progressive enough tax structure. Mamdani also believes that, but he's now also saying we can maybe fight that battle a different day if the money is there for my free buses and my childcare expansion. So these are fascinating choices that you have to make based on your philosophy, not wanting to create more headaches than you can handle, and your practicality. Final thought from each of you, governing. One final governing lesson from the work you were part of in government that this transition should take to heart and the next administration should take in. So much has been made, of course, of this idea that, Mayor Bloomberg's management style was to hire really great people and mostly let them do their thing. And obviously he would continue to make a lot of decisions at the top, but there was a little bit more of that trust atmosphere and less micromanaging. That's the type of thing I'm trying to get at here. That's why I bring that up as an example. Sorry if I took yours, Anthony, but any final thought on the art of governing here as a new mayor will be taking over in a few weeks? Meera, you were most recently in government.
We've learned a lot from the Bloomberg style, and I think I haven't heard anyone on a campaign or in practice say, I'd like to do the opposite of what Bloomberg did. So I think it's an undisputed truth now that you need to hire the best managers, the best experts, and be disciplined about how you make decisions. So that is core to running government. And I would only add, there's for many of us in government, like the sky is always falling. Somebody will tell you that the decision you're making is about to bring the end of the world. And it happens all the time. So making sure that you have the right gatekeepers and the right tolerance for those moments, and you never stop listening. So you have to do both things at the same time. What Emma was saying is you also can't say that means I can shut everybody off and isolate. You still have to have the art of being able to listen to genuine concern and discern that from, maybe it comes mostly from lobbyists, from that kind of concern.
Anthony?
Have the courage to do the hard things first. And the hard things aren't always the obvious things. You'll learn about that very quickly. And what Mike would tell every new hire, don't screw it up.
No, that's not exact. He said that to the women. I remember he said it to me, but I was told he said something else to
Yeah, he might have said
to
something
me.
else. I'm not going to say it.
Yeah. I remember
You are correct.
I came down off the podium. He's like, don't screw it up. And I was like, oh, I won't.
He said it with love. Then.
Yes, he did. He did. And I think I completely agree. I think that Mayor Bloomberg understood what it meant to lead and to be the face, and then to put people in place to get whatever it was, done. And he trusted them with that. But he also trusted, with his life, his first deputy mayor. And I think that is core. When you have a very strong, solid relationship with your first deputy mayor, who will tell you, that didn't go so well, then you're the better for it. If you don't have people running behind you who are as eager to be liked and loved and to be celebrated as maybe you as the mayor might want to be, you're in trouble. Like if you have people who aren't doing that, you're good to go. First deputy mayor's key.
Yeah, a very unique. Patty understood Mike,
Yeah,
but also she understood government and she understood people, and she kept things really well managed.
Round of applause for our. Thank you all very much. Thank you all for being here. Please join us December 2nd for Jano Lieber.